Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bridge to the Bay with Dr. Veras. I'm Dr. Matt Veras, and this is episode 8 with Dr. Laura Russell. Now, Laura and I met when we were in grad school. We were in the same program at Western University, and she actually did some research I was a little jealous of, some really cool genomics research. Now, what's kind of unique about both of us is that we went from academia to industry, and we both moved from Canada all the way to the West Coast to California and San Francisco around the same time, too, and kind of right out of our Ph.D s. And that was pretty rare from where we came from. What's also unique is that when Laura got here, she went through a transition within her first year here that is pretty exemplary of the industry, but can be quite concerning if it's your first time going through it. And what happened was she actually went through a layoff at her first job and then got hired a few weeks later for an even better position right across the street. And this is a perfect example of when you live in a locale where there's a big density of industry, especially in biotech, where there is here in San Francisco or Boston or even in San Diego, it's growing. You really have an opportunity to fail and still land on your feet. So we talk a lot about growing up in London, Ontario, going through undergrad because we went through similar programs, and also grad school. And then we talk about her experience going through this career transition. So if any of that sounds of interest, then enjoy. And if not, hopefully one of the future episodes will be of interest. Thanks. Hey, Laura, Dr. Russell, thanks for meeting with me here.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to come on your podcast here and talk with you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was perfect to have you come along and talk a little bit about sort of your career trajectory. We're kind of both starting off, but we've had a little bit of differences, some similarities. But the reason I kind of started this podcast was to let people know what the considerations are really coming out of academia, what your different career options are, what that looks like to see the actual person that's gone through it, and to hear from them, like, what are the real concerns, drawbacks, but then what there is to look forward to and how you go about really choosing where you go next and navigating perhaps in industry, switching between jobs that perhaps people in academia don't realize is kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good subject to talk about because from what I remember, like we were in the same PhD program, right? So you're well aware. I think it was focused mainly on people sticking to academia.
Right.
They didn't really necessarily prepare you for other careers. So it was kind of, you're on your own to try and navigate and see how it goes. So,
and I think that might have worked like 50 years ago, right? That made sense. I think most people that went in academia were planning on sticking around, and there was the career path. There were jobs available, that kind of thing. And then I think, even the people I knew that graduated, 5 years before me, maybe even 10 years, the market's slowly been contracting, I feel like, for academic positions. But it's not necessarily a bad thing because industry's been growing in biotech as well. So you may have to move to different areas, but I feel like it's especially crucial now to use those transferable skills and try to go to industry if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, we were in the same program. So that was Physiology and Pharmacology.
Yeah, same year.
Same year, yeah. So we graduated 2020, right? Yeah. And so we have a very similar background. We're both doctors, apparently, at least philosophical doctors in the sciences. And we kind of entered our careers at similar times as well. But since we're now actually scientists, which I still find it weird to say,
I know.
My parents find it pretty cool.
Yeah.
So when did you sort of get into science? Did you sort of recognize things as a kid? Was it something that, I know a lot of people sort of do research in undergrad, and that's when it spurs an interest in research. Can you remember a time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't specifically remember any day where I was like, science is the day. I think it was kind of a natural progression for me a little bit because I was asking my parents actually a little while ago what I was like when I was younger.
Okay.
I don't remember everything. I don't really know. And both of them said that I was very curious. Like I always wanted to know how things worked, and I was always asking like, why?
Yeah.
Like, why is it like this? And so there was that. And I did pretty well in sciences starting in elementary school, obviously very basic things, but definitely like caught my attention starting early on. But it wasn't necessarily like physiology, pharmacology right away, especially at that age. You're not really introduced to that. But even just like, I remember enjoying climate science, like the types of things that were pretty factual. I like learning about those because it made a lot of sense to me to put the pieces together.
Yeah. You didn't mind going sort of deeper if you didn't know something to ask that next question and follow up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There was always that kind of intrigue there for me. So,
yeah. So were your friends like that as well in childhood?
It's a good question. I don't think so. I think I had a wide variety of friends. Like I went to French immersion, starting in grade 4. So there was this kind of weird transition where I went to an English speaking school, and then I was doing well in the French. We had 40 minutes of French a day, and then I got recommended to go to this French school. So I had friends from my English school, and then I had friends from my French school. And then I've always been really interested in sports and things like that. So I had friends from soccer and all of that. And I think even when I got to undergrad and was studying science, a lot of my friends I met in residence because I was living on campus there. And they were in philosophy, social sciences. Like I would say most of my friends weren't in the scientific areas, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah. Never thought about it that way, though.
Yeah. I'm always kind of curious because I feel like scientists can either go, I see them go kind of two ways. All of their friends are scientists, and like at work and at home, that's all they talk about. And for me, I kind of need like a break or change of pace.
Yeah.
And so I tend to surround myself with people that do all kinds of other things. Like, so my friends are artists, musicians, writers, journalists, politicians, accountants, lawyers, that kind of stuff.
It's a good variety.
And then, the people immediately surrounding me at work and stuff, they're going to be scientists, right? So I always have that. But I almost find like it can be good to get out of that and think a little bit differently, or even address the questions that are kind of like basic, but you don't like evaluate on a regular basis. It just kind of goes as an assumption. So I think it's a good balance. So it sounds like you're more on that side of things, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think you have it like exactly right in the sense not every scientist is going to think the exact same. So you can obviously learn from each other, but at the same time, other people have different perspectives. And I do learn a lot from them for sure.
Yeah. Right. There's different kinds of intelligences, right there. And I like to value everybody's perspective. Okay. So I guess let's sort of like go along the scientific journey in your life, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Starting, I guess, from high school, when you were looking to apply to universities, I guess, did you always know you wanted to go to university?
Yeah, in a way. It's funny because like love my mom, but she definitely never it wouldn't have been acceptable to go to college.
I see.
And I don't have that perspective now. Kind of like we were just saying, there are different things. And I mean, university is very theoretical, at least for undergrad, right? You're just learning the theory behind things. I mean, in science, you have some lab-based courses and stuff, but generally you're in the classroom in lecture style environments. And I mean, I think it's improving a bit now in terms of internship possibilities and more hands-on learning that is associated with universities now. But I guess there is that distinction in Canada, at least, between university and college. Yeah. And I think that some people used to have a more negative kind of mindset around college, and that it wasn't as high achieving. But I really think it's just two separate buckets.
Yeah. And I think they should continue to be two separate buckets. I think they can each have different strengths, and it's a fit for a different kind of person. Like, not everyone wants to learn about all the theory and sit in the classroom for like 8 hours a day or something. Some
Yeah.
people need to be active and getting involved hands-on, and they can just be just as productive and valuable. For
Yeah.
sure. Okay. So then when you were preparing for university, what kind of factors were you weighing? Like, did you look at a bunch of different schools? Were you assessing by geographic area or by program, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I think, yeah, all of the programs that I ended up applying to were in my province, so our province, Ontario.
Mhm.
So lots of good schools, I think. But I never really thought of applying outside of Ontario very much. And even in high school, so you have to take, well, you can select certain courses, right? But when I was still in French immersion in high school, so most of my elective courses or things that I could choose were actually filled by the French courses that I needed to take
Oh, I see.
to fulfill that French immersion requirement.
Were your science courses in English or French?
Science courses were in English,
Okay.
so it was kind of interesting. Like you actually started out with more courses in French in grade 9 and 10,
Okay.
and then it kind of got switched. You still had some courses in French, grade 11 and 12, but it was a little bit more English based, and all of the math and science were always in English.
Okay. So it's like kind of preparing you for university. You need the more technical stuff in English.
Yeah, so just to like finish off that thought, it was basically I didn't have a lot of choices other than my French courses and then what my parents kind of wanted me to do,
Yeah.
which was science, but I think I wanted it too. There was definitely a moment in terms of me like thinking about my life in general and a few years back being like, is this what I wanted all along, or was I told this
Yeah,
is what I was
yeah.
wanting? But I think it all worked out for the better, and I was interested in science, but at the same time, I was so young, like I don't really know entirely what I was interested in.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah,
It's sometimes tough to parse, but it could also be like sometimes you just need to do something
yeah,
and like be active, and then from there you're building like a building block or a stepping stone where perhaps you have more possibilities than when you started.
mm-hmm.
So at least you're moving in a positive direction.
Yeah,
But yeah, the whole influence of the parents, I think it could have varying degrees. Like I feel like some of my friends that like some of my like Indian friends specifically, their
Mhm.
parents were like, "You're gonna be a doctor. Like
Yeah.
that's the only option." They're like trained from when they're a kid, they're gonna be doctor. And a
Mhm.
lot of them go through weird like psychological, I guess questions that they're trying to address, especially in undergrad. And I still feel like most of them become a doctor, but almost once they're in med school, they're like, okay, I'm going to be a family doctor because I'm too burnt out. Like I don't want to do any other specialty.
yeah,
I'm going to settle for that. And then, it's a decent career, but I feel like there are so many other options. And when you can kind of survey the field and not be like pigeonholed, then you can really see all the possibilities. And I feel like, especially in industry, there's just so many different kinds of companies doing
Yeah.
all different sorts of things. And even if you are a doctor, you can use that skill set and apply it to industry as well. So I guess, there's the good and the bad to the parents pushing. Sometimes it'll get the kids that are a little lackadaisical to, get running a little bit. But then, those of us that do want to take the time to consider what's meaningful to us,
yeah.
sometimes we need a little space. But
Yeah. And I
yeah.
mean, just one other point to that as well is I wouldn't say my mom was like, this is your career and that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite like that, but I think what she saw was that there were a lot of great jobs in healthcare in general, and to get there, basic sciences was kind of the path.
Mhm.
So she thought that that would be the best way forward, kind of. So I think that's where she kind of stressed that we, being myself and my siblings, kind of follow some sort of healthcare path.
Mhm.
So, for example, I have two older sisters, and one is an X-ray technician, and one is a nurse in the emergency room. So
Oh man,
we're
she's
all
going through it right now. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, she's on mat leave right now.
Okay.
But yeah, it's an interesting time to be a nurse for sure.
Mm. Okay, I see. So your mom was like, at least get the undergrad in the sciences, and then you can decide from there.
Yeah, and I think if I really didn't want to do it, it's not like she would have forced me to. And another thing she also did say when I was asking her about my childhood, she's like, "You always did what you wanted." So I was like, even though I think there's some influence from her, I do very much kind of march to the beat of my own drum and figure things out for myself. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So you think you've kind of gotten along your own path then as you've progressed? I
do. There was a moment in undergrad. So for my undergraduate degree, I did a major in medical science and I did a major in French as well. So I kept carrying on with the French. I really liked it. It came pretty naturally to me. And I did an exchange program as well where I lived in France. So that was in third year undergrad and I didn't take any science courses. It was very chill.
Yeah.
It was a little bit more of a vacation, but also I actually credited a lot with helping me grow up a little bit and kind of take on more responsibility and think more about what I really wanted to do after undergrad and things like that. So there was a moment where I thought maybe a career in something French related or in the government as well, because as you know, in Canada, it's pretty important to speak French and English if you do work for the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I definitely considered maybe I could do a job like outside of science, but at the same time I thought, nah, let's go with science.
Yeah. Just want to go back to when you're applying to university, because you were saying you were just sticking to Ontario, right? So I'm curious, like, how conscious of a decision was that, and was it related to having friends and family that are close? Because I remember talking to my mom when I was applying to university, and mine was a little like rushed, so it was a little awkward on top of it. But she was saying that she didn't have the guts to go away from home. So like her family lived in Kitchener-Waterloo. She went to the University of Waterloo, and she was like, you know, maybe I could have gone to Toronto or something and explored the possibilities or whatnot. But she's like, I wanted to stay home. Her parents were getting older and she wanted to be around, that kind of thing. But in my mind, I was like, okay, well, I don't want that to be the reason I make my decision. I don't mind being close, and maybe for friends, that's probably what I'm going to weigh. But I didn't want to stay in like Waterloo region, for instance. So I at least went like an hour down the road or something, hour and a half down the road. That was my little separation. And for me, I think it was because it was so rushed, I felt a little safer, at least being, you know, within driving distance, within a day to see my parents. So it's kind of like a happy medium. But I feel like if I would have taken my time a little more, maybe I would have gone a little farther or, you know, taken a gap year or something. But I was always in a rush for whatever reason.
Well, I think it's a prime example of like hindsight 2020.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, like looking back, I love to travel now. I don't know if like in grade 12, it was as much of a consideration in terms of like moving away, let's say to even like British Columbia or something.
Right.
I never really thought of it. Like it just didn't come to mind, I guess. And maybe the fact that there are a lot of good schools in Ontario as well. For sure. I don't think the decision was specifically to stay close to family or friends, but I can't really put my finger on why there wasn't kind of the want to branch out a little bit more. I remember though, I was applying to some different types of programs, so I have a lot of interests, and that's also the issue. So I already mentioned my interest in French in general, French language, French culture, obviously interested in science, but I also really like sports and exercise. So I applied to the University of Ottawa, which would have been maybe a 6-7 hour drive from London, my hometown, and where we went to school. And I got into a program that was French immersion kinesiology.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Like, and they also, that school also like offered a pretty sweet scholarship and things like that. So I was really considering that. And I do remember having a conversation with my mom being like, I don't know, I got into science at Western in London and I got into this French immersion kinesiology program like 7 hours away. And she's like, oh, Western's such a good school. You should just stay here. And I was like, okay.
It wasn't too hard to sell.
No, I think I would have been happy either way, I guess. And I think my life would have unfolded quite differently if I had gone there. But again, no regrets. So
That's good.
yeah.
So did you get to, I guess, keep more in touch with your friends during undergrad? Because they were close, presumably, or some of them?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was interesting to go do my undergraduate studies in the city I grew up in, because the friends I was making were mainly from out of town. So those were the ones I was making in undergrad. But then I still had a lot of my friends that were in London that I could hang out with. So there were again kind of the separate groups of university friends, high school friends, and soccer friends, things like that. But looking back on it now, I kind of think there was a bit more pressure to like see those high school friends and my family more because they're in the same city. So I would feel guilty if I didn't stay in contact as much because they're right there. But at the same time, you're kind of going through all these transitions and like considering new life paths and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm always curious about people that stick around. Did you find that you had like a different perspective on the city or different relationship with the city?
I think up until grad school, I had a somewhat negative view of the city, maybe because I felt it was small, and I had lived there for, let's say, 20 years of my life, like ready to move on. But interestingly, probably, I don't know, midway through grad school, I started really appreciating the city a lot more, being like, I understand why families live here. It still was something that I wanted to get away from just for my own personal growth.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure I could get more than just a job at the university. Maybe there's something else, but it is kind of small in terms of opportunities. So,
yeah, it's like there's a certain set of opportunities. And I guess for our skill base, we can flourish like elsewhere as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's interesting you were saying that there's more pressure to visit family and friends. Like that, I'm just thinking back to undergrad. It was a transition definitely for my parents in like seeing me every day versus not. Just in first year. So my mom was like calling me every day. I'm like, I don't like
She missed
like,
you.
yeah, I was like, I want to do my own thing for a while. So that was like something we had to negotiate out, and it became easier with time. But I remember, especially in like end of undergrad, grad school, I kind of had made peace with the fact that I'd be leaving, probably to the U.S., if not to the like a bigger city, Toronto or Vancouver, something like that.
When did you kind of start thinking about that?
Well, if I'm completely honest, I was probably thinking of coming to California in middle school, but it seemed like a little far-fetched at that time.
Right.
I wasn't sure exactly how to go about it. And then, I found enjoyment in Canada, and, the caliber of science was just as good as the US. So, and I had a lot of friends there, really good support group and that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't have minded staying in Canada, but it wasn't until like I was ready to apply to jobs that I really had to be honest with myself. And the only jobs I applied to were out in California. So if I was truly honest with myself, I was probably like a little nostalgic with Canada and like having that safety net of friends and family. But I kind of knew like, again, for personal growth, I got to go somewhere else. Maybe I can bring that knowledge back. Probably stay here because it's warm and I like it. But yeah, I kind of had to leave as well. But I do remember telling my mom specifically, get used to me being far away. And we're only like an hour or two away right now. But try to imagine that I'm in the US or something and you can't see me. So we're going to have to work this out anyway. So might as well start thinking about that now.
You were preparing her.
Yeah.
Because you knew.
Well, preparing myself too, right?
Yeah.
I love my mom and my family. We get along really well. So, the pandemic, for instance, has been tricky. I wasn't expecting to come here and then not be able to go see them regularly either.
Yeah. When I moved here October 2020, and I pretty much didn't go home for a full year, which was the longest I had ever gone. And I think normally it would have been okay if it was by choice.
Yeah.
But I think it's harder when it's forced. And there were some big things I missed. Like my sister got married and I watched it on Zoom. And that sucked.
Yeah.
Like I would have liked to be there. But
for sure.
At the end of the day, it's a minor thing that we'll be fine.
Yeah, it's just tough because you do know globally we're all going through like this pause in our lives, right? It's normally these big life events that we look forward to and gathering with a large group, right? Like a wedding, for instance, and to celebrate those steps in, our loved ones' lives. Everyone's kind of struggled. So it'll be interesting to see what the ramifications are. But I think going forward, hopefully we'll all be more appreciative of those moments. And I know I'll really take the time to absorb it and not take it for granted, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I wasn't away for quite that long. The longest I went without seeing them was 6 months. But I probably chanced it a little early on. But I was a mess out here alone. And like when I first moved, I moved in August. Was it 2020?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like peak pandemic here in San Francisco, and everything was locked down. Like businesses weren't open. Like I couldn't get my social security card. It was that bad. And like you need that to do everything. Like I didn't have credit, so I couldn't buy anything. I couldn't put a deposit down. Like
I know the struggle.
Everything was hard, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, as soon as I can go see my parents, I did. So any of the little loopholes that opened up, I was gone. And thankfully, nothing bad happened. And, I made it through somehow without catching any of the variants along the way. So very lucky. But yeah, the longest I went was 6 months, I guess, between this past summer and the holidays. And that was tough, especially because I was hoping that they would come see me, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But my parents are going through their own health kind of stuff, and they want to, be careful and stick close. So yeah, tough times, but a lot of personal growth too. Like I feel like getting through that, I can kind of handle anything now.
It's one of those like doesn't kill you, makes you stronger type things, because I felt very lonely when I came to. I don't know if it was as bad in October 2020, but still I knew like 2 people coming here and I wasn't super close with them. So started work remotely, didn't meet any of my colleagues. And it was hard. I felt guilty even trying to reach out to meet up with people, because I was like, you don't know me very well. Why would you risk coming to meet me? So it was a few months of like being quite alone, but things got better. So
yeah, I feel the same way. I was extremely lucky to have my friend Dylan, who went to grad school at Western as well, and he came out here about a year prior, and he did his degree in biochemistry. But he came out here with his wife, and they're super friendly and welcoming. And so what kept me sane was them. And we had like a workout regimen. We were like going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. We were hiking every weekend, like both weekend days. And, that was enough social interaction to keep me going. But if I didn't have them, I don't know what would happen. It would have been terrible. And like through them, we met a couple of friends, and we could have our own little kind of bubble, 4 or 5 of us. And that kept us going. But yeah, even like meeting people that I knew were out here that I wasn't necessarily close friends with, again, just felt the same thing. Like, are we chancing it? Like, are people going to get like agitated that I'm asking to hang out? And it's weird, like social games we're having to deal with as a society. And
Something you would never think you have to deal with.
Yeah, those are never questions really asking myself. Like if I want to hang out with someone, just ask typically, right? So
Yep.
not a big deal. Just say no. But then people saying no also feel bad about it too, right?
Yeah.
So everyone's kind of on eggshells right now, unfortunately. But let's go back to undergrad then.
Mm-hmm.
So you started in the sciences, and I guess we don't spend too much time in undergrad. But for me, the main thing looking back on it was I kind of divided it into two halves, like the first 2 years and the last 2 years. The first 2 years, it's building up like a base knowledge of stuff, and they're not really telling you the why, or like, they're kind of just like, you need to know this, trust us, and you'll learn like why it's important next year, that kind of thing. And then third and fourth year, you can start choosing courses that more align with your interests, and they go into a little more detail. Sometimes they tell you, oh, what we taught you last year, just kidding. It's not actually like that.
Mm-hmm.
Similar, but and when you look at the details, it's slightly different, which to me I found a little annoying when they teach us the way it is right off the bat. But did you notice sort of a transition over the course of the years, undergrad?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I do remember first and second year being very basic, and I wasn't as interested in the subject matter. Maybe it was because they weren't telling us like how it applied as much. And I kind of understand why they take that approach. I think there can be differences in the learning style and depth of learning in high school. So they try to kind of even everyone out. And yeah, I just remember though, like not really enjoying my science courses very much in those first couple years. And that was hard because it's like, okay, then that's where I was like, should I be doing something in French?
Yeah.
And for me, what really changed was, again, when I mentioned going to France and I was there for a whole year, I kind of thought about it. And right before I went there, I took a pharmacology course for the first time. And the pharmacology course was pretty basic. And I really enjoyed it, though. It was the start of learning some mechanisms of action.
Right, yeah.
Like how some drugs might bind to a receptor and then elicit a signaling pathway. And that was the first time something really clicked for me in terms of thinking, oh, this is really intriguing for me. And so went to France, came back, and had a plan where I was like, okay, it's the only thing I feel like really passionate about. So I loaded up my schedule with every pharmacology course I could take. So in third year, we could only take like one full year pharmacology course. But in fourth year, I took everything. I took clinical pharmacology, cardiovascular, genetic pharmacology, pharmacology of drugs of abuse, human toxicology. I literally took everything I could fit in my schedule, and I really did enjoy it. So that's where kind of the beginnings of going to grad school even started being born in my mind. In a sense.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. You just kind of dove right in. And it's nice to hear that you took that opportunity to change pace and go to France. And I know a lot of people that did that. Like one of my good friends, she was doing a degree. Where was it? I think it was Ottawa. And then she went to France to do like a master's in poli-sci for like 8 months, real quick, and then came back. But she said like it wasn't what she learned necessarily, but it was getting exposed to a different group of people. Like in Europe, there's people from all over Europe that also join there that all speak different languages and things. You're exposed to a bunch of cultures like in a different way than you would be here. And then the perspective, sometimes they like, especially in politics, I guess, like the global perspective is different in Europe than in North America. Like they're coming from two different angles. But then, that's kind of like you following your instincts, right? Of like, I need to do something that I want to do, right?
Yeah.
And then I can figure it out from there, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, I mean, no one that I knew specifically went on an exchange like this in terms of, for example, everyone that I was with from Canadian universities, there were about 20 of us that went to the same school in France for this exchange program. Everyone was on the path to basically become a French teacher or something like that.
Okay.
And Our classes were entirely in French with the French students. So there were some other exchange people in the classes we were in, but it was mainly just like French language, French literature. I did French linguistics as well, studying along with French students.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I was the only one in our program that I know of from the Canadian students that had a science background and like didn't plan on really becoming a French teacher or something along those lines. So for me, it was really a year of like reflecting, a little bit of traveling for sure. Like I only had class 3 days a week.
Okay. Nice.
But it kind of gave me time to just like be away from home and again, grow up and come back with a plan. That's one thing that I'm learning to do more, like actually plan.
Okay.
Like even now, like coming out to California, I knew I wanted to from probably midway through grad school, but I just kind of show up. I'm like, I apply for the jobs, I get the job, I come here, but I don't really have a plan. I'm just like, okay, I'm in the job.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is my 5-year plan? So I'm gonna do the planning in the next like couple weeks. Really create a 5-year plan and see how it goes.
Okay.
And it's kind of like, I don't know, it seems pretty late to be doing that.
No, not at all. Because we just started a career where we're on our 2 feet and we can support ourselves. And that gives you a certain flexibility, right?
Yeah. Just paid off my student loans.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you.
I got a little ways to go still.
It takes time.
I want to come back to the 5-year plan, but maybe let's like, walk a little through. Yeah. It helps me frame the conversation, I guess. So in, what do I want to ask from undergrad? You were saying, so pharmacology really like clicked and that like spurred your interest. For me, it was genetics and we kind of got exposed to it first year. Did you have Tom Haffey as well as bio prof? So there's this like notorious undergrad prof in first year bio, this guy that didn't have a Ph.D. So that's controversial right away, but you used to be able to be a lecturer without a Ph.D. And he was like on purpose, very like abrasive, I guess, or like he didn't, he was just very blunt, I guess. And unfortunately in first and second year, there's a lot of like pruning of class sizes. So like a lot of people don't move on after first year, for example. And so that was a big course on kind of weeding people out. It's really unfortunate that a lot of people drop out. But I remember, for example, to illustrate how this guy was, I think it was the first day of class. He's like, okay, everyone put their hand up. Who wants to be a doctor?
Yes,
right?
I knew you were going to say this. Yeah. I remember this.
So like the whole class puts up their hand, right? And that's, the people that are dreaming big. A lot of people, their parents are telling them they have to be a doctor.
And he means like medical doctor.
Medical doctor, right. Yeah, and everyone like puts up their hand. I think I did too, maybe, or like halfway up. And he's like, okay, well, for 90% of you, that's not going to work out. So you should start planning for that right now. And everyone's like, oh, okay. But I think like his way, because I took some courses with him later on, and he was a lot more like personable, I guess. But he kind of described his strategy as like, no one's going to tell you the truth. And he sees a bunch of people like maybe in second or third year, just like falling out, having like to really go through these like psychological changes of like, what do I actually want to do? And his perspective was the earlier people know, the better. So I'm not trying to be a dick, but I am trying to like shake him up a little bit.
Yeah, no, I very distinctly remember him doing that. And he's like, oh yeah, most of you put your hands down. It's not going to happen. And I mean, lucky for me, that was never my goal. I never thought about being a medical doctor ever, but I feel fortunate in a sense because it can be a really difficult path. And if you really want it and it's a struggle for you, the mental battle is there. So I appreciate the honesty of that.
Yeah.
Him bringing that up. So
yeah, and I think the people that I knew that did really well in that course and took them seriously, I guess, they did go to med school, most of them. but they had amazing grades first year and second year, and that was what's being evaluated for the med school application. And my first and second year were terrible. I was there to hang out and like decompress, get away from family, make some new friends, party probably way too much. I never studied in high school, so I had a terrible work ethic as well. And the sheer volume of things in undergrad, you can't really get away with that.
Sounds very familiar. Too familiar.
So yeah, I had to learn how to study after I would like bomb an exam. And it tended to be like later on in the semester that my grades would drop. Like I normally hit the first midterm doing pretty well, and then motivation or whatever would drop. I guess typically in the winter, which I don't do so well in. But anyway, yeah. But so he was kind of a blunt teacher, but he exposed me to the idea of epigenetics, which I didn't know about. And I had already kind of been interested in genetics and evolution because my grade 12 biology teacher was really awesome. And I remember one assignment specifically, we had to basically look at pre-hominid species. And I really enjoyed that. So she had like scientific articles printed out for us of like, this is how Australopithecus was discovered, and this is what they found, and how they did the carbon dating and stuff. And then like how Homo erectus was discovered and how that differs and what that means for human evolution, that kind of thing. And I was like, oh, like, okay, we have a pretty good idea where we came from. And, it wasn't that we evolved from apes, which was another thing they kind of taught us in grade 12. It was that there's like random mutation, and then like a new species showed up that looked more similar to us than an ape, but it was a common ancestor, and we like diverged. But anyway, epigenetics unlocked this whole other set of possibilities, which is that it's not just the code that you're programmed with. There's modifications on top of it that can change how that code is read and expressed. And that's sort of like the environment impact on who you are as opposed to the genetic impact.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, that explains people then, or that explains animals. And so I got to learn more about this genetic stuff, especially this epigenetics. And then, second year genetics was hard for me, but it was fun because it was problem solving. It wasn't necessary memorization.
Yeah, like doing the Mendel kind of different allele.
Yeah.
I forget what they call it, but it's like you do some calculating.
Yeah, I can't remember right now. Oh, that's bad.
It's okay.
But yeah, you had to like solve little puzzles and like look at, fractions of if you have these two parents and they mate, what are the possibilities, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I liked being able to solve a puzzle. That's also when I started drinking coffee because the exams were at like 8 a.m. and I was not awake for that.
I didn't start until grad school.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
It was a social thing. It was like
Really?
everyone from the lab was going down to Tim Hortons at the hospital because my lab was in the hospital, and I was like, I want to go. And at first I would go and not get anything, and then slowly I was like, oh, maybe I'll have some of this. So
yeah, that's how peer pressure gets you. Yeah. So I didn't drink coffee because I heard that it stunts your growth. And I wanted to be a professional basketball player when I was a kid.
Of course.
So I was like, I'm going to hold off. And then I was like in undergrad. I'm like, I'm too short to play in the NBA anyway. And, I need to be awake for this. But anyway, just getting back to, that was my exposure to a subject area in biology specifically that I liked. It was unfortunate that I couldn't really take specific courses till third year in that. But then again, same thing. Every course I get into, that's what I did. Cool. So I guess in undergrad, when did you start to realize you may be going to grad school?
I think it might not have been till my very beginning of the last year of undergrad. So I remember thinking, okay, I've now applied myself in my courses and I'm doing well and I'm interested, and I definitely like pharmacology. I liked two of my fourth year courses the most. Those ones were the genetic pharmacology one I took and cardiovascular pharmacology. And I was starting to ask around, ask my profs, okay, what is grad school like? is there anything I should be doing now that would give me a competitive advantage? So one of our professors said that I could be a volunteer in her lab. So I did that in my last year of university. So I was doing very basic things, doing like DNA mini preps, things like that. But it at least gave me some more exposure to the lab and something to have on my resume.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one thing. And then, yeah, I just started looking into different programs that I could go to and trying to understand how to navigate it. Because I don't know, maybe there were some kind of sessions we could go to in terms of learning those things, but I think I did most of figuring it out by just Googling, like, how do I apply to grad school? Mm-hmm. And typically the process would be like reaching out to a supervisor, seeing if they'll take you on, and then getting admitted to the program. So I started trying to look at different universities and seeing what specific universities had profs in cardiovascular or genetic pharmacology. And this time was different than undergrad because I was actually looking at schools internationally. So I was going to apply to the Netherlands, a school in the Netherlands. And then there was also a prof I found in Australia at Monash University. I think it's in Melbourne. But anyways, and then I also found someone who I thought would be interesting to work with in British Columbia. So that's in Canada, but still more broad than Ontario, which was kind of what I was thinking for undergrad. So I feel like there was already some growth there. I had tasted travel and knew that I really liked it. So like on the one hand, yes, the science is important and liking the project that you're on and trying to see if you're going to jive with the supervisor. But I think it's also a great opportunity if you can find that in a new place, then why not have both? You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was just, while you were talking, I was trying to remember how much information we had to go on in fourth year. And I think we were pretty much on our own. I think I was just searching each individual grad program and like emailing the admissions office specifically.
Yeah, like reading their homepage and then being like, okay, I don't understand this.
Yeah. Like a lot of emails. I think I called a few of them, which I rarely called people at that point. Yeah, it was a odd time. So I guess you were thinking about things in your last year, so you didn't do like an undergrad thesis, for instance, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I guess maybe I was thinking of it slightly before, because now that you mentioned that, I remember reaching out to Anita Woods, who is in our undergrad program, runs the thesis course. And I was like, look, I'm not in the honors specialization program. Like technically, I'm not qualified to be a thesis student, but will you take me anyways? And she was like, there's no space. So there must have been something turning at that point that made me, I don't know if it was specifically grad school or if I just thought I needed to get more research experience to see if I wanted research. But there was a moment where I was like, oh, like I'm only doing this major in medical science. Is that enough? Like, am I even going to get into grad school without doing a thesis? So it didn't work out for me. And I mean, well, things worked out for me, but I didn't end up doing an undergrad thesis. No.
Yeah. I think I similarly was like, okay, what can I do besides my courses to get some more experience? And it was like either for professional school or grad school. Probably figured, bolster your CV in some way, demonstrate you have other skills than, just doing the coursework. And I guess I was thinking research assistant right away. And I think actually I applied to be like a work study research assistant or something in third year. And I don't think I got any of them.
I applied for that too. I forgot I applied for that.
Yeah?
I remember having an interview now. It was an immunology lab.
Okay.
Because I also kind of late in my undergrad studies, I took some immunology courses, which I found really interesting as well. So I applied for work study, didn't get it, and then moved on.
Yeah. So I was kind of upset that I didn't get it because it was like they wanted more experience or something to be taken. I'm like, where the fuck am I supposed to get that experience? This is the point, right? Like,
Yeah.
my grades aren't that horrendous. Like, I can speak to you, right? You can tell that I can hold a conversation. Like, can I do a trial? Like, can I work for you for a week or something? And you see how it is. And I'm like, yeah, we don't do that. Okay. Anyway, so I was like, okay, I got to step up my game because I want to be able to work in a lab here. And this is bullshit that I'm not qualified. So I stepped up my grades, I guess, that year. And then I was prepared to go to the thesis course the following year. There was no reason for me not to get in. And then at that point, I was reaching out to specific profs even before the thesis course. Because I wanted to like build a specific relationship with a prof before I applied. So there's like high probability of success because I didn't want to go through that experience again of just losing everything. So I was pretty prepared by the time we were doing it. And we had to select in bio, I think the year before, right? Yeah, I think you have to select the year before you do the thesis because you start right away in September, something like that.
So did you do, because I think from what I remember, like you technically should be in an honors specialization program for a thesis course. Yeah. Were you in like an honors specialization in bio?
Yeah. And I tried to get into genetics, but I had like too bad of a grade in like cell bio or something. So I didn't make honors spec genetics.
Okay.
But whatever. I still took most of the courses. But yeah, I think, because I interviewed in like the semester before, in third year, I guess. And then I worked in the summer in that lab as a work study student. So it worked out that, the prof I linked up with, Cheryl, my old boss, was like, yeah, I'll put an application for you for work study if you're going to be my undergrad student. That way you hit the ground running from the school year, right? And so that was super valuable too, because then I was hanging out in the summer with a bunch of grad students.
Getting paid.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a big thing. It was like, oh man, there's someone willing to help me get paid, even though it's like a very little amount.
Yeah.
But, campus is empty from undergrads pretty much in the summer, right? So it's like grad schools hanging out, and it's like a very like collegial atmosphere, at least in that program. So it was really fun to just like be part of the crew. And I got to learn what grad student life is actually like. And at that point, I was like, okay, I could get used to this. This seems pretty cool. I'll hang out with this for a few years and get a degree, I think, at least a master's. And then I did my undergrad thesis and loved it. And so I was like, okay, I'm applying to grad school for sure.
Yeah.
And then I applied to BC and Toronto and Western. I think that was it. Because I wanted to stay in Canada still. I didn't think I could afford going somewhere else. And I wanted to go to a big city if it wasn't Western. And so I didn't get into U of T, which I was pissed about for their genetics program. There's like super high bar. But I did get into BC, which was essentially equivalent in rigor at least and notoriety. And I was like in the process of matching with a prof. And I think I was having trouble getting into a lab that I actually wanted in that program. There was, I think, two of the big labs I was trying to apply to, they were in an off year for funding, so they weren't accepting any students. So I had to wait a year, and I was like, shit, but that's why I would want to go there. I don't want to do like plant genetics or something.
Yeah. I had a very similar experience at BC because, like I mentioned, I liked cardiovascular pharmacology, and there was this pretty highly renowned prof who did research in diabetes and specifically pharmacology research. And I was very interested in being in his lab, and we had a couple Zoom, or it wasn't Zoom at that time, it was Skype, I think. Skype calls. But regardless, he seemed very interested, but at the same time, he said, I can't hire anyone right now. Will you wait like a year or a year and a half? And I was like,
what do you mean?
No, I don't think I can do that. So, I mean, looking back, if you really, really wanted that lab, it wouldn't be that much time. But I don't think you think that way when you feel motivated and you're ready to go and keep learning. It's like you don't really know what you're going to do with a year off. And that's kind of scary to take that chance even.
Yeah.
So,
like a year off in your early 20s is a lot different than late 20s, I feel like.
yeah.
You're I don't know, it's almost with more perspective, a year is less important. And then you can kind of realize, again, looking back, hindsight is 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that off year is a good thing anyways, right?
Yeah.
But I was thinking the same thing. Like, I can't take a year off. Like, I need to keep this pace, and I want to finish school as soon as possible and be out of here.
That's true. Well, because especially if you're considering a PhD, it's like, it's going to be, let's say, 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to be done school any later than you have to.
Yeah, for sure. And so I applied to that program. I got accepted, and I accepted that. And I was in the process of matching. And then I was looking into like housing and stuff like that. And I was weighing all of the variables. And I was like, I don't know if this is even feasible, to be honest.
Expensive.
Yeah. I was like, you got to live in Vancouver. I was like, and I'm a grad student, so I'm not going to make any money. So where am I going to get this money from? It's not like I had savings, and like my parents couldn't support me at all. And like, am I going to work a job on top of grad school? That doesn't make any sense. So I was weighing all these options, and I'm like, shit, I'm going to be so stressed out if I go out there. And on top of it, I'm going to have to make new friends and stuff. So it's going to take like a year or something to adjust. And then it's going to put me behind in my program and all this stuff. I was like, maybe I should just stay at Western. And part of me felt like I was settling because that's where I did my undergrad. It was a good opportunity to get new experiences, go somewhere else. But then part of me was like, okay, if I'm really thinking about my future and setting myself up best at the end of grad school, then hitting the ground running to start grad school and maybe finishing early is maybe a better option. And from what I could glean by then from the grad students and stuff, it was that it doesn't matter so much the grad school you go to, it's the lab that you go to and how productive you are, because people end up going all over the world, right? And so I was starting to build the confidence, like if I did a degree at Western, I would be okay. And so ultimately, that's why I decided, and I think it worked out.
Yeah, I'd say it worked out.
Yeah. Okay, so then at what point did you look at Western specifically, and how did you go about picking a prof there?
Yeah, I was looking at Western, but kind of similar to you. I wanted to get out. Like, we had just done our undergrads at Western, and especially for me, I was from the same city, grew up there and everything. So I think I was ready to go, but the stuff at UBC wasn't working out because of the prof and the timing. And I looked at Western around the same time just to see what the options were, kind of as a backup plan. But at the same time, I only saw 2 profs that I thought of working for. One was in cardiovascular pharmacology, and I'm glad I didn't join that lab because things went down and he got asked to leave the school.
Was that in Phys Pharm?
Phys Pharm.
Okay, so I know who that was then.
Yeah, so...
Damn.
Yeah, I mean...
I was thinking you were going to say Rob Hegley at...
Oh, yeah,
Rob
no.
Arts.
Hegley is a really great scientist, and I don't think I even came across his name somehow. I don't know. Maybe because he was more affiliated with Robarts at that time, and I was looking in Phys Pharm.
He's more genomics guy as opposed to pharmacology, I guess.
That's very true. Yeah, he's pretty hardcore genomics. But then, the other prof I was looking at was the supervisor that I ended up going with, and to be honest, like, he had a very impressive track record, and I didn't think he would take a student like me who had never done a thesis or anything like that. But I reached out to him and had an interview, and it went well. And I remember him saying after the fact, like, he was excited to have me because he said I was well-rounded and had lots of different interests. So it was kind of interesting to me that he considered that, just because I think some people are very like, okay, what are your grades? What are your scientific accomplishments? But he was like, oh, no, it'll be great to have you in the lab. Like, you bring different perspectives. So Yeah, I mean, when I did get the offer, I was a little surprised, but also I was like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
This is the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he is super renowned worldwide.
I didn't
so-
know how much
Okay.
until like I started going to conferences in grad school and
Right. Yeah.
and people were like praising him like hard. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a huge deal. And even in Canada with like personalized medicine, right? He's
Yeah.
the guy. But okay, so did you start like in September or in the summer?
Yeah, I started in September. So the summer before that, I actually took the summer off for the first time ever because normally I would work full time just to make some money. I worked as a lifeguard for 8 years. That was kind of my
Okay,
college
that's a good
job.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, not a bad one, especially in the summers where it's hot, working outside at pools. It was good.
Mhm.
But yeah, I took that summer off and did some traveling and some volunteering. And I think that was good to like have that break
Yeah.
and then start grad school. Because
Yeah.
obviously a big thing, at least with our grad school, I think any grad school in science is like this. You don't get summers off. You just go.
Exactly.
You just go for master's 2 years or like PhD 5-ish years.
Yeah.
So
Did you realize that beforehand? Like, was that a conscious thing? You want to,
Yeah.
get the adventures in beforehand? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I was thinking the same thing. I went to Portugal with my family for the
Nice.
first time. And it was so much fucking fun. There's, difficulties. There's 5 of us that were traveling all at the same time. So just managing the logistics of that is difficult.
Yeah.
But everyone was generally in really good spirits. And we stayed there for like a month.
Oh, that's sweet.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But that's where my mom's family is from. So
Okay.
we stayed with like family friends and stuff. And like we knew a few of them because they had either lived in Canada for a certain amount of time or had visited a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it wasn't so foreign. So I guess it didn't feel as long because we were hanging with family. It's like going to the cottage or something, right?
Yeah.
But definitely it was a conscious decision from the whole family. Like Matt's not going to have time for like 5 years. Let's
Okay.
do this now.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad we did that. But the one thing I was going to say was applying to grad school. I remember, or maybe it was once I was in grad school, a bunch of profs applying to European either Ph.D. programs or postdoc programs for their students from Canada. So one I can remember, this lady, Swedish lady who's working at McGill, was applying to a postdoc for one of her PhD students and like writing reference letters or whatever.
Okay.
And like they get evaluated on different things in Europe, apparently. Like if you're not well-rounded, that's a big red flag. Like if you don't have volunteer experience, if you don't travel, if you don't enjoy some activity that you can break your time up, if you're not passionate about something outside of the science,
Yeah.
then they tend to not accept you, which is like opposite of what's here in some cases.
Yeah, I
right?
think so. I think like not even just grad school, but like med school,
Yeah.
so grade focused and things like that. Like to be honest, I barely made the cutoff for the minimum grade average I needed to get into grad school.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that that wasn't an issue in my supervisor's eyes. He's like, doesn't matter, you got in.
Yeah.
I'm like,
You made
okay.
the important part is you made the cutoff, I guess, not how far along.
And I think it does say something that like my grades in first and second year were not great, and I made up for it in third and fourth year, and you
Right.
can just tell like there's a huge improvement obviously
Same.
between like a 65 and like a 90. It's like, oh, so like you were just figuring it out, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And you're so young when you go into undergrad. It's like some people are 17.
Yeah.
I was 18.
I was 17, yeah.
Yeah.
And a young boy, a bunch so reckless. Yeah. So it does depend on the person, right? And so especially when you're doing grad school, that specific supervisor, that specific lab is key. So I got a lot of advice when I was applying because I'd met a bunch of grad students in undergrad there. They're like, whatever lab, whether it's here or somewhere else, you want to talk to the grad students because they're going to be able to tell you what life is like working for that supervisor. And that's the most important part because if you have a prof that just like is not supportive, puts you down all the time, doesn't recognize your achievements, doesn't support you for like trying something new or applying to scholarships or whatever, it can just tank your grad school career.
Yeah.
And that's like a nightmare situation. And hopefully it doesn't happen that often, but it is possible. So you want to cover your bases, right?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, I saw something I liked the other day on Twitter, and it was talking about mentorship basically, because I think mentorship is huge, super important for the development of any grad student, obviously. But it was basically someone just saying that, so they're a PI, they're a supervisor, and whenever they train grad students, they treat them as like colleagues, not as like less than or inferior. Obviously, no one tries to be like treating someone inferiorly necessarily. Well, maybe not no one, but
Right.
hopefully.
Yeah.
But I think just like going in with the mentality that they're your equal, I think that's hard sometimes to do because supervisors obviously have a lot more experience and things, but I think it brings in the humanity approach of being like, okay, everyone has to start somewhere. Like, they're not stupid. Like, you just have to kind of treat them equally and help them bloom, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And like that framing is super important because, like you said, you can have this unconscious sort of thing where you're like, I'm more experienced. I'm just gonna. You don't even think about it, but it comes off as you're talking down to someone, right? Or at least you're not elevating what they have to say if it's valuable. And that was something that Cheryl said as well when I was interviewing. Like here, we value the science first. We want everyone to make contributions. We don't want there to be a hierarchy of things. No one's time is more important than someone else's. We expect everyone to be supportive and teach new techniques, that kind of thing, share that knowledge.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that makes me feel pretty safe here then.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay, so grad school, and then I want to talk about industry for a while to round out things.
Yes.
Okay, so grad school, what did you do? Did you feel imposter syndrome? And how did that help you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so grad school, my lab was called, at the time, personalized medicine, but now precision medicine. So it was focusing on genetics and how genetics can affect the response to drugs.
Super cool.
So it really did put like two of my passions together, which was super important, I think, if you're wanting to kind of start out your career or build on that. I mean, you got to be really passionate about it. So that's one thing. Specifically, I studied, because it gets very detailed when you do a specific Ph.D. thesis project, for example. I started out as a master's student, as many people do, at least in our program. And then after a year and a half or so, I switched into the Ph.D. So the way that this works is you don't have to finish the master's thesis. You just kind of carry on with the project, and at the end, you write your big thesis. So mine was looking at a drug transporter that's expressed on liver cells. And basically, that's responsible for taking certain drugs into the liver cells so that they can exert their mechanism of action and then be metabolized. So you can imagine that if there's genetic variation, let's say that renders the transporter less effective or more effective, then that can change the concentration of drug both in the bloodstream and in the liver cell. So yeah, I mean, I started by looking at specific genetic mutations that are present in humans.
Yep.
Number one, these are pretty rare in the transporter I was studying. So they hadn't been explored in detail. So I did a lot of studies in vitro, so using different cells, and I would express the genetic variants of the protein into the cell and then do transporter studies. So give a drug or a bile acid, for example, to the cells and see whether or not there was less or more uptake. So pretty simple studies and all in all, but I was doing it for like 35 different genetic variants, all individually. So transport studies, looking at mRNA and protein expression as well, things like that. And then I also did a knockout mouse model for that. So yeah,
I don't think I've covered this on the podcast yet.
Yeah.
Could you briefly explain what a knockout mouse is?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of different ways to generate a knockout mouse, but basically the goal here is to render my protein of interest, that drug transporter, to like knock it out. So that means it doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So you're studying the effect of, let's say, giving a drug to the mouse or maybe measuring something endogenous, seeing how the absence of that transporter affects maybe concentrations in the blood again, concentrations in different tissues. So seeing how the body, in a more physiological approach, as compared to just like if you're doing it in cells, you don't have all the other systems of the body working.
Mm-hmm.
So doing this in an animal model gives you a more holistic approach to understanding really, are there compensation mechanisms? Do other proteins try to compensate for the lack of that protein?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of just putting it in an intact system.
Yeah. So it's essentially genetic engineering
Yes.
of a mouse, right?
Yeah.
And then you're studying the consequences. So I know the answer to this, but would you have used CRISPR or something like that? Because that's all the rage these days. Right?
We wanted to use CRISPR at one point. So this knockout mouse model for my protein specifically was kind of in the works before I got into the Ph.D. program. Mm-hmm. It was something my supervisor had wanted to do for a while because this transporter hadn't been studied in that way. So we didn't use CRISPR, but we were struggling to knock it out.
Oh, okay.
And we considered CRISPR, but it didn't make sense. Eventually we got it by using a different approach. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I just I want to take the opportunity when we can to explain a little bit of the nuances of the science that maybe get lost in the super exciting stuff that people see on the news and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think most people would have heard of what CRISPR is, which is essentially like molecular scissors, people call it. You can snip the genome where you want, and then you can pretty much replace or just remove it, or you can replace that area with essentially whatever you want.
Yeah.
So that's like a huge revolution in genetic engineering.
Yeah. And it's not like you need to cut out the entire gene, just a little piece, and then that usually will do it.
Yeah. For the knockout, at least, you're cutting out part of the gene, typically that renders it dysfunctional or non-functional or not even expressed.
Yeah.
But specifically in modeling mice, so that's really important in pharma, for instance, just as Dr. Russell said, do you want to evaluate how all the organ systems affect drug metabolism, for instance? But they don't often use CRISPR, at least these days yet, because one of the main issues and why we're not genetic engineering humans, even for devastating diseases, is there could be off-target effects. So there's these molecular scissors, but they look at, I guess, for the words on the genome, and it's a very small set. So you can imagine
20, 25 letters.
Yeah, letters. And you can imagine like the whole genome is billions of letters. And so you might see that pattern somewhere else, right? And so those scissors will just clip anywhere they see that pattern. And it might be the area you want and somewhere else you didn't look. So there's people developing all sorts of assays and algorithms and things to avoid those, but it's not perfect yet. And so there's a more like tried and true approach that they use in mouse genetics, and that's typically like the Cre-Lox-P method or flip recombination is what another way to do it.
Yeah, we did Cre-Lox-P for my mouse model.
Yeah,
it's pretty standard.
Yeah. And I worked on a couple of those as well.
Nice.
And the other thing I wanted to let people know is you could probably verify, like, to generate one of these mice takes a long time and a lot of money.
Yes.
So it's if it works, it tends to be really valuable in the field and to that specific supervisor as well.
But I mean, the value comes from the novelty.
Yeah.
If you're the first one to do this in a living mouse, for example, which is often used in research, it's the first kind of whole animal, then you can typically publish a high impact paper. But if someone beats you to it, even if you don't know they're working on it and you're kind of working on it side by side and they publish before you, it really kind of downgrades the novelty sometimes and can take away. So even though you had this great scientific idea, if you're not the first one to put it out there, it's not going to be you that necessarily gets the credit as much. And it is important for scientists to have that credit.
We have a word for that, right?
Scoop.
Scoop. Yeah. So you don't want to get scooped by someone else publishing, similar study to you beforehand. But again, if that mouse model works, then typically you can do a lot of follow-up studies and collaborate with other people that want that as well. But a lot of the times it can model something like in humans. So you have this disease that's genetic and you develop a mouse model that has the exact same mutation. That's super valuable to pharma, for instance, because you want the highest fidelity model of what a human might be, and having the same genetics in a mouse essentially is a great way to do that in many cases. Okay. So already we can kind of see how the skill base applies to pharma, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think a big part of that is, genetics is a whole big area of science, but specifically like already for my PhD, I was working on drug transporters. So we were very pharmacology focused starting out in our lab. So even like, not to jump too far forward, but like what I do today in industry is focused a lot on similar things like drug transporters and drug metabolizing enzymes. So having that background has been pretty critical for what I do.
Yeah, well, let's jump ahead then and see like, okay, end of grad school, you're thinking of what to do next. A lot of our colleagues, were attempting to pursue academia. I assume you're going to conferences and things and trying to meet people and see where you might go next. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so in grad school in general, I did try to put myself out there and go to a lot of conferences. I really enjoy the in-person, specifically, kind of vibe of the conference. So loved going to sessions where you could learn the cutting edge science, sometimes stuff that hasn't been published yet, things like that. And networking, I think, is a very important aspect of that as well. So networking with people at the conference, like you have to actually put in effort, Like I would try to reach out to people and ask to just have a 30-minute coffee chat, things like that. And even not at conferences, I would do the same thing, like get involved with societies. So I was part of the Canadian Society for Pharmacology and Therapeutics, as well as the International Society for the Study of Xenobiotics.
Okay.
Xenobiotic being a drug. So just being part of those societies and taking advantage of some of the things they have to offer, because kind of like we mentioned, there wasn't as much guidance necessarily from our graduate program. Right. It was kind of like a little bit you're on your own. So for example, the International Society I was and still am a part of had a really good mentorship program that I discovered in the second last year of my PhD. And I had a really good mentor the first year I joined that, and she was very helpful. We would have half an hour conversations just on the phone every month.
Oh, nice.
And she'd be like, okay, you drive the conversation, just like, what do you want to talk about? And it would be often at that point, well, for example, for a while I was like, oh, should I do a postdoc or should I go into industry? And for me, the postdoc wasn't necessarily to become a supervisor. It was just to gain more knowledge and expertise so that I might be a more competitive candidate for industry. So like I knew pretty early on, probably by my second year, that I didn't want to be in academia. So then, kind of just understanding whether or not a postdoc was necessary, whether or not I actually really wanted to do it or thought I needed to do it.
Yeah.
That was an important conversation. And also just, that mentor I'm speaking about, she met me at the conference, introduced me to people there. And that's actually where I met my first boss. So at my previous company that I am no longer with, I worked there for just over a year, but I had met her through networking, kind of through my mentor, if that makes sense, because they worked together for quite a while, and she thought she would be a good person for me to connect with, and it went well, and we had each other on LinkedIn, and I saw a job posting, and we connected through that.
Nice. So that you did exactly what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it worked out exactly how you would hope, right?
Yeah.
You also did an internship, right, in grad school?
I did. So that was pretty much right midway through grad school. So at like 2.5 years mark. And that was also through a kind of similar networking type experience. So for example, it's not super common for people from our program to do an internship.
Right. I was just going to ask you how common. Yeah.
Yeah, not very common. I knew that someone maybe 4 years earlier in our same program who was in my lab, she did an internship actually with the same supervisor in industry that I ended up doing one. And I was interested, for one, because I knew I wasn't going to stay in academia and I really wanted to see what industry was like. And I mean, again, it doesn't hurt that it was in like South San Francisco, beautiful California, you know? And so I was like, okay, this seems like a really great opportunity. And there's a connection there because the supervisor for my internship was actually a postdoc for my Ph.D. supervisor years back. So they worked together, had a good relationship, and the internship supervisor would come every year to Western to give a guest lecture in the clinical pharmacology course. Nice. So when she came the one year, I went to her guest lecture, and then we also had lunch. So it wasn't just me and her at lunch, it was all the grad students. And yeah, it was just asking her questions about it. And I kind of kept in touch with her here and there. And I asked her, is there anything specific, like any courses I can take outside of our like coursework that we would do for our university that would give me any competitive advantage in industry? So I ended up taking this course that was a little over my head at the time, being like a second year PhD student, but it was a course in like pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics and modeling. And I think just the fact that I was interested in learning and really like bettering myself and putting in the extra effort to get those skills, she saw that when I reached out later to do an internship with her. She's like, oh, you have like put things forward in motion and stuff. And she had an internship project she was thinking about. So then we just did it. So yeah, it was good.
What was I going to ask for? Could you say the company, or is that confidential?
No, I think so. Yeah. Okay. So it was at Genentech in South San Francisco. So it's a pretty large company. In San Francisco itself. There are 15,000 employees, or at least there were in 2018 when I did the internship. I believe it's almost been 4 years. But yeah, they're a subsidiary of Roche. So really great company to work with. A lot of cutting edge science going on there. And yeah, it was my first exposure to what industry really meant. Before that, it was kind of like this foreign concept. Yeah. I was like, especially in Canada. Industry.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would describe it as like a fast paced research environment where, I mean, doing an internship is a little less intense because usually they're not putting you on a very pressing project, right?
Yeah.
It's something they want to investigate, maybe some idea that they've been thinking about for a while, but don't have the bandwidth or something like that. But yeah, another thing, this supervisor at Genentech, who ended up being my supervisor for the internship, I forget what exactly her title was at the time, maybe principal scientist or something. We would meet weekly and like catch up about the project and other things. But I was also bringing up with her, I was like, oh, should I do a postdoc or go into industry? And she actually favored the idea of a postdoc. She thought it's a really good opportunity. And I mean, it's never a bad thing if you are interested in it. But another thing she said was that working in industry, like as a scientist, principal scientist, is kind of like being an academic supervisor without worrying for any grant funding and anything like that. So she felt that, yes, there are some questions that you have to answer for the company and you don't always have all the creativity that you might have in an academic setting. But at the same time, at least at Genentech, they're very research oriented to try and they really like to publish and things like that, which not every single company is as focused on. But she was basically saying she still had a lot of, I guess, scientific creativity and bandwidth for that and funding for that. So she was able to do really cool science and think of new studies she wanted to conduct without worrying about all the headaches that come along with grant writing, how competitive it is, and things like that. And I was like, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah. And I would almost argue that sort of the increased freedom you get in academia gets nullified by how the grant system is set up, because you're not going to get approved for a grant on a subject area that you don't have formidable expertise in, or like a lot of preliminary data setting you up.
Yeah.
So it selects for sort of just like moving little bits forward, like barely pushing the needle.
And I think it is a shame, because I think innovation is very important, but at the same time, it's a huge risk to take on someone that doesn't really have the expertise, even if they try to say, oh, I have these partners who are experts and will help me. I think it's a safer bet, especially given that there's not unlimited funding, and funding is very competitive to get. It's hard. On the one hand, you need strong innovations, but on the other hand, it's like, why would we give this money to you if you can't prove that it's going to work,
Yeah. And you would hope that the government would put aside a certain amount of funds for high risk, high reward opportunities, right? And there's some of that, but I feel like it's more and more going towards even those high risk opportunities are getting funded by industry anyway. And they might donate to the university and have a named department or something that supports that. But sometimes the scale of resources you need don't align with a grant program, right?
Yeah. And I think, to be honest, I don't know enough about it even. I just know that it's super competitive. You could have a really cool idea. It doesn't get funding. And I mean, there is a lot of you might take it personally. It might be a long road before you actually get funding. My PhD lab had a lot of funding when I started, and then there was a bit of a dry spell, and I think there's a bit more money now, but I think it's a bit of a psychological game as well. You gotta be really mentally tough and resilient to deal with that and be like, oh, it's okay. I'll just keep working. It's like, okay, I hope it works out. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of profs, this is the third time I got rejected for this grant, but then the fourth time they get it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's, that mind game I have a hard time with. And the other thing is you'll come up with a great idea and then you'll spend a few months writing a grant and it'll take a few months to get reviewed and it'll take a few months for the funding to get released.
The time.
So by the time you come up with the idea to the time you can get started is often over a year. And hopefully in industry that gets shrunk down right away. You basically come up with the idea. You don't have to write a big grant. You have to maybe give a presentation, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you can do that quickly. Typically there's systems set up to evaluate new proposals in the industry more rapid fire and on a more continual basis than granting agencies, for instance. And so really you can kind of have an idea and get started pretty soon. And to me, that helps me keep momentum as well. So I like that aspect. I did want to just say a couple of things about Genentech because it is a unique company. So first of all, it was the first biotech company ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
They started an industry with recombinant DNA.
Yes.
And I can't remember what their first product was. It was either insulin, I think, or human growth hormone. I think it was
maybe
insulin.
Human. I don't know.
One
of those two.
But they were both very early.
Yeah. Did you ever read the book The Gene?
I'm reading it right now.
Yeah, I think it talks about Genentech.
Do you see it?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. I read it a couple years ago, but there's a little I remember a intro to kind of Genentech being the founding father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that book is really well written by Siddhartha
Mukherjee. Yeah.
The Gene. Yeah. I'm like 2/3 done, something like that. My sister bought it for me, and I told her I'd read it. I read it on like flights.
It's lengthy.
Yeah.
But
It's good. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I
I
like
just
it.
don't read that often in general.
That's fair. I mean, there's lots of papers to read.
Yeah. Yeah, true. But like that was a huge advance in being able to scale up medicines, for instance. So insulin, the big one, is that they used to have to take pancreases from animals to extract the insulin because that's the organ in the body that makes it.
Yeah, there was no like synthetic
Yeah.
insulin made.
Yeah. So you only had as much insulin as was in a pancreas, and it scaled linearly with how many pancreases you have. So you can imagine you got to kill an animal for every pancreas you want. And they used to use dog pancreases, apparently. So you have like a vat of dog pancreases, and you take the fluid out, and it has insulin in it. And it's really inefficient. It made it really expensive. You had the cross-species reactivity from having to raise it in animals. I think they typically used animals that were going to pass away anyway, so I don't think the ethical concerns were large at the time, depending on how you view that. And so it was like revolutionary to be able to make human insulin in human cells at scale. And so like you could just have a huge vat of a ton of cells. They scale really easily. And that's their job. They just make insulin and make insulin and make insulin, and you just collect it. So that like basically made like biologic or like protein-based drugs possible, as opposed to just like chemicals or pills, that kind of thing. And the second was that I think Genentech got acquired somewhat recently. It might have happened right before your internship.
Are you talking about by Roche? Or
by Roche, yeah.
don't know why. I feel like 2009 rings a bell, but
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And all I wanted to say was the CEO of Calico used to run Genentech. And so he organized that deal around the time they were thinking of starting Calico. So it kind of worked out where he could sell this biotech company to a huge pharma company, and that they would keep their thing going, and then he could start like a side project. And so he was CEO of both at the same time.
Whoa.
Yeah. But he was actually the one that came up with, I think it was for insulin. He realized you had to use human cells specifically. So I think they had been using like, use hamster for something. But whatever, or maybe they were using yeast for something else. But the problem was like it's a protein that needs to be cleaved or cut by a human version of a protein. And then the final insulin product comes out looking a certain way. But in other animals, they don't cut it the same way. And so it's not the human version of insulin, and it doesn't really work as well. And sort of that advance really helped the company take off, helped his career take off. And so I just want to give that example. I think that was in the book that they talk about that. Like it was essentially like a small set of experiments that like weren't that big of a mental leap. It was just no one really thought it was necessary at the time. And he was like, nah, I think this is right. I'm going to try it anyway. So it's that idea of like, if you have an intuition about something, don't be afraid to take the risk and sort of bet on yourself. And sometimes it works out. So that's the only thing I wanted to say about Genentech. Oh, and also they're known for having a really strong postdoctoral program.
Yeah.
So people that can get into that, it's very highly selective.
Yes.
But pretty much if you can get in, you can go anywhere you want after.
Yeah. I remember hearing about the postdoc program while I was an intern, and it seemed like extremely competitive. So, I mean, I like the idea of doing a postdoc at a pharma company, and I thought about doing that. I looked into it a little bit, but what really I was up until pretty much I got my job, I was still very much on the fence about either doing a postdoc or going right into industry. So, I mean, I know we jumped just from the internship now and we're back here, but basically I was interviewing for postdocs and like, oh, maybe I should do it. It's a pretty good supervisor. But I did realize also it wasn't branching out very much from what I had done for my PhD research, which I think if you are going to do a postdoc, like, for example, I wanted to study epigenetics and post-translational modifications of some drug transporters, but which is slightly different than what I was doing for my PhD program. But I think it would be smarter to like completely switch, not completely, but switch gears into more like drug metabolizing enzymes, just something more different to really like round out the skills if I was going to do a postdoc. And it kind of just worked out in terms of like timing and thinking a little bit more like, okay, if I can get a job in industry without a postdoc, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
So like, let's try and let's see how it goes. And then it just happened really quickly, which I was fortunate because I know it can be a longer process sometimes, especially with the way that some companies operate and they interview for a while and they don't notify candidates for a while sometimes. But mine was very quick and easy. So I was like, this seems like the right group for me and I'm going to do it. So then postdoc was off the table.
Yeah. Well, I applied because I was, again, thinking similar to you, the postdoc's a good stepping stone. It like elevates the opportunities after that.
Yeah.
But postdocs don't get paid very well either. And I was pretty sick of being broke for so long. And especially if I was going to come to California, it's just expensive.
It's so expensive. Like, it's like if you didn't think you could afford life as grad student in Vancouver, then you're no better off as a postdoc in California.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there's some supplementation you can get with like scholarships and things, but I think in general, you do get paid much better if you're not a postdoc.
Yeah. But then there's the hybrid kind of where you get paid in industry and they pay their postdocs more.
Okay,
like 50% more.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot. And so I basically applied to industry postdocs or jobs. And I got an offer at Novartis as postdoc.
Nice.
And then at Calico. And I applied to like 10 postdoc positions at Genentech. Didn't hear back from any of them.
Yeah.
And then I decided to take the job at Calico. And I was senior research associate, so it's not a postdoc. It's not like a great title necessarily, but again, I bet on myself, and I assumed that I'd be able to get a promotion into like the scientist realm, which then opens up the possibilities from there, and that's what happened. So I got lucky.
Nice.
But then the pay.
I wouldn't say you got lucky.
Okay.
I say that a lot myself, and I'm just trying to train myself to not be like, oh, it was luck, like, because at the end of the day, like, okay, let's say you started as senior research associate. The reason you got a promotion isn't luck,
Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess people just kind of say it. And I guess I try and call some of my friends on it too that say it too much because it undersells their effort a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
But I like to think of luck as preparation meets opportunity.
That's fair.
That's just how I live my life.
Yeah. So it's really the definition, I think, might differ from person to person, what luck actually means. Yeah. Because there is a certain part of it that is somewhat out of your control.
Yeah,
circumstance, timing. Yeah. You might just be like innately offered more opportunities than some other person, like just through random connections. But yeah, at a certain point, it is a balance of also working toward it and setting yourself up for that success.
Yeah, I feel like I've read some things recently too. There's a study on luck, and I think the result was that like lucky people aren't technically any luckier than anyone else. Like the amount of sort of random opportunities that show up are similar across kind of anyone.
Yeah.
But the lucky people have a different mindset. So they're willing to see an opportunity as like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Now I should capitalize on it. I've been waiting for something like this.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone that feels unlucky. And then if, there's tons of opportunities that present themselves, but it's not quite perfect. And they're like, oh, well, then I'm not going to do it. And then you never kind of move forward. And the example that they gave was like the study was they got everyone to read a newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And on the front page, there was like a little block in like the bottom right corner that said, go to page 20 for the answer or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the goal of the study was. And the assignment was to like find a specific word in the newspaper or something like that. So like finding a needle in a haystack. And so the unlucky people tended to just start flipping through the paper and like reading line by line. And they gave up most of the time partway through. And then the lucky people, just when they took a look at the paper, they looked at it like kind of zoomed out,
Mm-hmm.
and they saw like this big arrow on the side. It said, go to page. And they're like, oh, that's kind of cool. And they just kind of flip, and the answer's right there, and they're done.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a great allegory to what luck looks like to me. It's that you prepare. So like, when an opportunity presents that's like in this realm, I'm ready to jump on it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm capable. So I don't doubt myself at that point because I've prepared specifically for it.
Yeah.
And then I can just move ahead. And there's no like loss of time or overthinking or whatever. But, if I'm a mindset of like just down on myself or feeling sorry for myself or something, then it almost perpetuates that cycle. Mm-hmm. So mindset matters.
Yeah.
And, be grateful for the opportunities, be looking for them as well. Mm-hmm. Things change. They will come around eventually.
And you have to sometimes embrace things that are scary.
Yeah,
like
that's a big one.
I do attribute some of my success to just like going to a lot of different conferences, sometimes funding my own way there. And I mean, as a grad student, I don't have extra money really, but I'm like, okay, it's going to pay off in dividends later, which literally ended up happening when I met my like previous boss at the conference. Like I paid my own way there.
Yeah.
No one else from my lab was going to that conference, but I was like, hey, it's a great conference. And again, like I used to get scared sometimes reaching out to people to like ask for chats, or like, I don't know. Yeah. Just a little bit nervous and be like, oh, what if they say no? Yeah. But at the same time, like, worst case scenario, they do say no. It doesn't really matter.
You're no worse off than when you started.
Exactly. Yeah. Like if your ego takes a hit, like get over it. It's fine. Yeah. And pretty much everyone is willing to help you. That's been my experience at least. I've never once reached out to anyone where they've been like straight out, no, I don't want to chat with you for half an hour or whatever. And it might be that the people I'm reaching out to specifically have been connected to me through someone who knows they're good at this, but at the same time, yeah, you don't know unless you take the chance and put yourself out there and try to set yourself up for success. And like even just having these coffee chats and stuff, I would leave always feeling super inspired. And sometimes if I felt a little bit down or something a few months later, I'd be like, okay, like I know that reaching out to people actually makes me feel better after the conversation, so like let me just talk to someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's I think you do that really well. That's not everyone's as good at that. So it also seems just from the outside perspective that you're quite brave. Like there's a lot of things you're willing to do that most people aren't. And you seem to just kind of go for it. At least that's what it looks like for me. I don't know if you're really good at hiding your nerves or
I think it comes, I get super nervous. And you mentioned imposter syndrome.
Right, yeah.
Still have that, I don't maybe it gets less and less over time, but I still don't think it'll ever go away. But it's hard too when you're like walking down a hallway and everyone has a Ph.D. and like you hear about the schools that these people have gone to for your whole life, like Harvard, MIT, and like, I don't know.
Everyone I work with is from
it's like, I feel, especially, I don't know, maybe it's also coming from Canada. I'm not saying anything in terms of it being a bad place to be educated. I don't think that's true, but it doesn't have the level of international like recognition as all of these places. And I have no idea whether or not they are at the same playing field. So just coming from that, and yeah, I mean, being in a room of like insanely talented and inspirational, intelligent people, it's like, okay, do I fit in here? Am I ever going to be there? Like, but that being said, I remember walking into my grad lab, so first year master's student, like looking at someone doing cell culture and being like, I could never do that. And I'm like, okay, now it's just because in my head, it looked like something intimidating
Yeah.
that I had never done before. Cell culture is like pretty easy once you get doing it. I mean, it can be more complicated depending on what you're doing, but yeah, just in general, like I think sometimes seeing things, they can be really intimidating from the outside, but you don't really even know until you're in it that it's like, okay, yes, it takes time to learn. You're not going to know everything right away, but all you can do is just take the opportunities and just go with it. And I mean, if down the road you really feel it's too difficult or too overwhelming or too stressful, like nothing's permanent. Just figure it out. Like you can change, you can do something else. So
yeah. Well, that's a great attitude, and I think it's obviously served you pretty well.
Yeah, I still get nervous sometimes, but one thing too that helped in grad school was going to the conferences, presenting posters or oral presentations. Like I used to be like almost deathly afraid of doing public speaking. Like honestly, most embarrassing thing ever, grade 4, I peed my pants in front of the whole class, like because I was scared trying to give this presentation.
Yeah.
And like just crying before public speaking. And I mean, I still get nervous now, but a lot of the time I get like good reviews after, and people are like, you were nervous? Like, I didn't know you were nervous. So in your head, you're like, everyone knows I'm nervous. But realistically, like, it's in your head.
Yeah. I think that's really true. I have a different perspective. I always relish the opportunity to talk in front of a crowd. I don't know. I have this debate with my family all the time. I think it's because when I was a kid, I was very quiet because my siblings were very loud and they wanted attention and they needed a bunch of whatever. And I was like, I don't care so much. You guys do whatever you want. And so when I get a stage, I'm like, okay, it's my turn to talk finally.
Nice.
And then, in terms of not being afraid of trying something new, I think I get that from my dad. And it's like the scale of things he's had to tackle in his life, it makes whatever I have to do seem so simple. Because he's from Iran and he had to escape during the Civil War. And so everything he's done, he's completely self-made.
Like the grit, the resilience.
Yeah. And like, even on the little things, like just growing up, seeing him do stuff, like he was a car salesman, but then, car industry kind of crashed. And then he went into like landscaping and renovation and stuff. And like, there's all these skills he picked up along the way. They just had no idea how to do. And he was like, someone else can do it. I'm going to try it at least. If I'm not good at it, okay, sure, I can move on and try something else. But more often than not, it wasn't that big a deal. And like someone else did learn it. And it's kind of incredible what we can pick up, especially with practice, right? So I think also the more times you like overcome your fear, the easier it becomes to do that. And then I think your opportunities even expand from there.
Yeah.
It's like it's a feedback loop that helps.
Well, and if you're not willing to put yourself out there, like you are going to limit yourself, right? You already have a preconceived notion of what you can and cannot do, maybe. And pretty much anyone can do anything in a certain sense, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we place limitations on ourselves a lot, I think.
I think it's incredible what a person can do in general. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize their full potential.
Yeah.
I'd say that's probably fair. And I was going to say one more thing, because you're saying like you're not sure if the Canadian schools are as good in education or whatnot. I think they're as good in education, if not better. I think generally Americans find that the Canadian grad school is more rigorous. I think most grad schools, you need 3 papers to publish and to get your degree. Here, it's not like that necessarily. Sometimes it can be 1.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, apparently, they tend to specialize on one technique or like a small subset. And so they don't necessarily get the breadth that some Canadians have, because when you're in kind of a smaller lab, sometimes you're asked to like cover multiple roles. You just don't have the expertise for someone, so you learn it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like coming out of grad school, like our skill level is the same, if not better. But I do think there is a downside to the way Canadians go about things, kind of in general. But again, it's like a self-fulfilling thing of limiting, like there's a ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is people just wanting to be friendly and look out for other people and not want to like make any people feel bad or anything like that. But I think there can be a little bit of this sort of sense in the air that don't want to achieve something too big or go too aggressive, either because it's just the infrastructure is not there and can't support it, but also it makes other people feel uncomfortable sometimes. And I started to feel a little bit of that at the end of grad school, where I was running hot. Like I wanted to get out. I wanted to go as big as possible. So I was running like 100%. I was like doing my exercise every morning and meditating, making sure I was locked in. Anything I was scared of or like putting off, I just did it head on. And I wasn't like, anytime I had to message someone and ask for something, it was just like on top of it, became automatic. And I was getting a lot done. Like my productivity like doubled or tripled compared to the rest of grad school. I was getting all these papers out and stuff like that and starting to win awards. And then my PI stopped putting me up for awards because my other colleagues hadn't won some in a while and I'd already won a bunch. And she was like, oh, well, it's an opportunity for someone else to get some. And I was livid because I was like, I worked my ass for this and I am part of the peer group that is evaluated for this. I believe I should be put forward just like anyone else on the same playing field.
I don't think that's too much to ask.
Right?
Yeah.
And the pushback I got was like, how dare you take an opportunity away from someone? I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
The way I see it is you took something away from me.
Like participation medal. It's like it should be merit based, and it's interesting you say that because I like just with how my supervisor was so busy trying to kind of implement precision medicine and like get policies and stuff and being a medical doctor, kind of taking that approach and not being as invested maybe as he was in his previous parts of his career in the basic research. Like, yes, he was still doing it, but he had, I think, a different set of goals. There was no one putting me up for awards.
Right.
But then actually, luckily, like in my last year, there were a couple times where someone external was like, oh, like I see you, and they actually put me up, and it just felt very nice. I was like, oh, someone's thinking of me.
Right. Yeah, it's validating in some way, but at least recognizing like I'm not here on an island being invisible. So I tend to be, I know I err on the end of like being a little more like stubborn on this point of like equality of opportunity, and then whatever shakes out after that is how it should be. And I feel like in Canada, there's a concerted effort across all kinds of domains where we want everyone to be pretty well off. And so we don't want anyone to fall too low, but we don't let anyone go too high. And you kind of just have this happy medium where it's a good place to live a family, everyone lives a decent life, that kind of thing. And for me, it's suffocating, it feels like. And I also come from a background of like, from like my dad in Iran and stuff, where it's a different society over there. And so I was raised with the context of like what it is to be a person in general and what are the different ways to go about living. And I know for a fact in North America, that's not how everyone does it.
Yeah.
Especially in Canada, it's not the only way to do things. And I also come from a family of like entrepreneurs and stuff. And looking at the opportunities in the US versus Canada is a drastic difference. Just not supported in Canada as much. And the US, they go crazy, but then you have the bigger extremes. You have way more poor people in many aspects. It's like a third world country in many places. But then you get the uber super successful people on a global scale. And I just felt like you can't get that global impact in Canada, where like it's almost never going to happen.
Well, and I agree with that in terms of like our careers, for example, in the industry that we're in. It never even occurred to me to try to look for a similar job in Canada because, yes, we do have some pharma industry. I think it can be very niche and specialized. But that being said, the opportunities in the States and even in Europe are much greater, especially if you're just establishing your career.
Right.
Like some of the advice I had gotten was to actually start at a large pharma company if you can, because you have so many experts there in various different things that you can learn so much in a small amount of time. And depending on what you want to do, again, like who knows, maybe I'll go back to Canada at some point. Got to do my 5-10 year plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like having exposure to such brilliant researchers, not to say that there's not Canadian talent, but like the opportunities are not there for us. Like there is some talent that I think comes back after maybe
I would
going
say
away.
they even have the talent. They just don't support it to the maximum potential.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, all I'm trying to say there is a lot of people that could be retained in Canada, if they had the proper opportunities, go elsewhere.
Yeah, well, that's a brain drain that people have been talking about forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's pretty obvious at this point that it is a thing, unfortunately. Well, that kind of leads into the next bit. So being where we are and having that concentration of industry jobs, I think something that you've been through over the last few months can really capture the uniqueness of being in that environment. So would you mind telling people sort of, you've been through a transition in your career and how that's gone about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the company I joined in October 2020 is called Veras Biopharma. And I think we had around 350 people. So not a startup, but definitely not large pharma. But again, I joined because it seemed like a really great group of people and great opportunity. And so we're located in South San Francisco. But over the course of the year or so that I was there, there were three clinical trials in phase 1 or 2 that didn't meet their primary endpoints. And with that said, I think there was a lot riding on those clinical trials, especially if you're a smaller company on the small side. Having 3 of those not pan out is a major loss. So basically, I remember after the second one, there was definitely some tension in terms of just the vibe. Just people kind of questioning, okay, what's going to happen next? Like, what if this next one doesn't work out? I think even after the second one, people thought at some point there would be layoffs. But after the third one, and because we're a public company, all of these reports get released to the public like pretty much as soon as we see them, unless you're working directly on that specific project. So it was announced that the third one didn't meet the primary endpoints. And right then, there was an announcement of 75% reduction in force. So, I mean, a typical layoff that's like considered large is like maybe 30%. So 75% is a huge cut for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I knew right away, especially like being the least senior one there. I was like, there's no way I'm staying. So yeah, it basically went to, I think, less than 75 people, maybe 60 people now. But yeah, that was announced mid-September. And the way that these work, there's some sort of laws where you don't just like cut people's jobs and that's it. Like you have to have, I think, 2 months or so for them to transition and try to find something. So the news was announced September 15th. And I mean, it was upsetting, definitely. I remember a couple weeks before asking my manager, I was like, so what does it mean, like, in terms of job security? She's like, well, as long as you like where you're working and you feel you're still growing and stuff, like, those are the metrics that I go by in terms of, like, sticking with a career. So I know other people had been, like, looking for a job before the third result was announced. Yeah. But I was like, oh, yeah, we'll see. And then I was kind of like slightly shocked when it did happen. And it mainly sucked because like I really did like the group of people I worked with. I think like I'm hoping that I can find a similar kind of vibe with people. But you never know, right? Sometimes it's not exactly what you want. So we'll see. But yeah, basically my last day at Theravance was November 30th. And it was a little bit tough working there between the announcement and then the end because
it's super awkward.
You kind of just know it's coming to an end and also don't have as much work to do. So you feel like your purpose isn't there.
Yeah.
So that was kind of tough. And then at the same time, they were pretty flexible in terms of saying like you can interview during work hours if you need to, as long as you're getting the work you have to do done, things like that. And there was also a lot of support from everyone in terms of like trying to help me find a new job. So people were super nice, and it is a small world. Like
it is, yeah.
Everyone knows everyone in a certain sense. So just having people reach out and connect me with people they knew who were hiring helped a lot. Like I already had a few emails and LinkedIn messages the same day of the announcement to like just be like, hey, do you want to like interview here? So I think at first I didn't know how hot the job market was. And then I was like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's moving.
It's definitely booming right now, especially for, I guess, people in my type of role and being kind of junior and stuff. So yeah, I had a few people that I worked really well with at Theravance connect me with people they said were amazing to work with. And I think even just having them vouch for these people made me more comfortable. And then I would do like more comfortable considering a job, like working directly with that hiring manager, for example.
Yeah.
And then I also like looked up the companies because some of them were smaller, didn't know exactly what they did. So I tried to find what I thought was a good fit scientifically, but also interviewed with a few companies and decided like where I thought the company culture and the group I'd be working with day to day fit the best as well. Because to me, a lot of these companies are doing amazing science and the science is still important to me, but I think I need like a pretty solid feeling that I'm going to get along well with these people and that like it's not just work you to the bone, not care about like how you're doing. That doesn't really fit with my whole way I want to live my life. So just finding a place where I thought the balance of being a really great company, again, kind of following the advice of some of the mentors I had previously, trying to get some experience at a larger company. That was also a consideration. And then, yeah, I start my new job tomorrow. So all from...
Exciting.
Yeah, it took me about 4 weeks to sign the job offer from being like announced that we had been laid off and not formally laid off until like 2 months later. But I felt this need to solidify and sign something like as soon as I could, just for my own like sanity.
I'd be the same way. Yeah.
And I mean, there's a little bit more pressure also being on a visa. Like,
right. Yeah.
Like we're not from here. So, I mean, again, yes, we're just from Canada. And worst case scenario, we go back to Canada and it's fine. But it's still like, yeah, you don't want to be forced out.
Right.
So I'm really happy. I'm going to be starting as a senior scientist at AbbVie.
Awesome.
And
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. So it all worked out. I'm excited to work with the new manager, and I don't really know who's going to be on the team that I'm specifically going to be working toward. So I'll be focusing on oncology, which is different than I was working on respiratory programs at Theravance. But I mean, you don't need experience in the specific disease area necessarily that you're going to work with. You just need kind of some basics. And again, so I'm a drug metabolism and pharmacokinetic scientist. So drug transporters and other things I learned in the year and couple months that I was at Theravance really apply heavily to this role. So
nice.
Yeah.
So you're saying, did you say you got a job within a month of being laid off?
Yeah.
You still had a month left in your old job?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think that's unique to the area, that because of the proximity to all these other pharma companies, you not only had the concentration of opportunities, but there is a sort of environment culturally as well, that there is sort of interflow between these companies?
I think in a way, yes. But also it's kind of interesting how the landscape is so different these days. Like, for example, I don't actually work in the lab. Like, I don't need to be on site. And people were reaching out from not just San Francisco area, but like Boston is a big hub and things like that. And asking if I was going to relocate. And I was like, no, I just got here. But definitely it is helpful to have so many in this area, because I know at least for the next few years, I do want to live in this area and see how it goes. And yeah, just having so many companies, like we work very closely, like geographically to one another.
Yeah, I could see
down the
Theravance
street.
from where I was across the street. Yeah.
And AbbVie just opened a brand new location in South San Francisco and is literally across the street.
Yeah,
like across
it's so funny.
Across the crosswalk from Theravance. Yeah. So like, and then Genentech is just down the road. Did my internship there. So like, there's just so many companies, and I mean, I think it is great. I think it is helpful, and like companies, especially in biopharma, do go through a lot of transitions. They do restructurings and things like that. So just having a lot of opportunities in the same area is actually beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a safety net. You're more able to fail because there's another opportunity across the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really important. And again, that's something that doesn't exist in Canada. So it can't have that self-perpetuating cycle of acquiring really good talent and retaining them, right? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So I think I've taken you for longer than we agreed upon. So that was awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your time with me. I have one final question before we go, and it's on purpose, really broad. So we're both technically biologists, right? You could say that?
Kind of.
As an umbrella.
Yeah.
Scientists, I guess you could say more broadly. But working with biological systems. And particularly where I'm at, I'm thinking a lot about life, because we're trying to extend lifespan or health span as well. But there's some questions I've had to revisit of like my basic definitions of things, because also just in the science, what we think of as life and trying to preserve life or health, it can have like a slightly different definition depending on what angle you're looking at. And the way things have been classified in the past doesn't necessarily reflect the most specific definition, if that makes any sense. So my question is, what does life mean to you?
Yeah, that is a very broad question. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was just like trying to find your place. There's so many opportunities and options, especially like if you have a lot of interests. I think it can be difficult to know or feel that what you're doing is right. But at the same time, I think that there are these definitions of like what's right and wrong. I think it's not black and white. It's more like, okay, like what does this opportunity give me in this moment, and what can I learn from it now? And does it still resonate with what I thought I wanted? Does it resonate with what I do want now? And again, thinking more to the future, do I think this is where I might be later? You might not know the answers to all these things, but I think just like we are generally driven by like purpose and trying to make an impact and enjoy ourselves along the way. I think the older I get, the more I'm trying to slow down in some aspects of my life and like really enjoy what's around me and not be so hyper focused on like working really hard and like nitpicking everything that I've done wrong, but more looking back on where I've come from and be like, okay, interesting path. And just I think the older I get, the more I like myself and the more I understand myself. And I do feel optimistic that it's only going to get better. And I mean, that's not to say that I don't go through hard times or anything like that. That's not the case. Like, things can be difficult, but at the same time, one small thing that just came to mind was like, I just went back to Canada like a week ago, and one day with the wind chill, it felt like minus 25 Celsius.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm never living in a cold place again. And I got back here and I was walking in a tank top and I was like, it's so nice out. I think I was underappreciating California before I left, because there was a bit, even though like I went through a lot of emotions in terms of losing my job, getting a job, which I was excited about, but then still kind of tied to my old job that I wasn't happy working at because of the circumstances. Just like, it's okay to go through that, and I think it's totally fair, but at the same time being like, okay, like put that aside. It was a very small part of like this amazing opportunity that I have, and let's just see how it goes and trying to be thankful for what I have.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful answer.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to consider it and answering, truthfully, it sounds like. So I thought this was a great conversation. I think it's exemplary of the message I'm trying to convey, sort of an empty space where I think we can start to contribute to those that don't really know what it's like to navigate an academic career. And I think it's unfortunate because there's all these people that can do great big things. There's all these opportunities that exist around the world. And, I just want to do a little small part in helping, perpetuate that cycle of people self-actualizing, essentially. So thank you for taking the time. It was great to speak with you again.
Yeah, no, thanks again for having me. I'm very happy to be here, Dr. Matt Veras. And I'm happy you're doing this. And I hope I answered some of the questions about trying to navigate industry. And I guess the last thing I'll say is just try to find mentorship, try to network, and really, even if the infrastructure isn't there or the resources aren't there for you to like kind of try and navigate industry or something from Canada, like you got to take it into your own hands and reach out when you need to.
Yeah, very well said, Dr. Russell.
Thanks.
This has been Bridge to the Bay with Dr. Veras, with more to come.